In a kingdom far, far away, the king and queen had 3 daughters. All 3 of them were beautiful. But while the charms of the eldest 2 drew praise, the beauty of the youngest was beyond words. Even the gods, when they met her, couldn't help but to compare her to the most sublime of goddesses, Aphrodite. The 2 elder sisters had already wed. Not to just anyone, to noble princes. But strangely, Psyche was yet to marry. Suitors came to contemplate and admire her, but none had the courage to ask for her hand. It was said that the suitors were too overawed by her near-divine beauty. Meanwhile, up on Mount Olympus, she whom the gods had named the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, was fuming. She viewed this spectacle as an offense, as sacrilege. Down on earth, her admirers were ignoring her, believing they had found in Psyche a new divinity. So Aphrodite hatched a plot to quickly get rid of her rival. With a click of her fingers, Aphrodite summoned Eros, the god of love. Eros was a god of lowly birth. He wasn't, like Aphrodite, Apollo, and Athena, one of the 12 Olympians. Neither was he a direct descendant of Zeus. He was conceived on the day Aphrodite made her official entrance on Olympus. To mark the event, a great feast was held. Zeus invited all of the deities, even those who were old and usually left out. Among them was Porus, god of wealth and abundance. More than the other guests, Porus stuffed himself with delicious food and wine served in honor of Aphrodite. Then, once full, he lay down beneath a great oak tree and fell asleep. Just then, Peña, goddess of poverty, made her entrance. She had come to beg for food at the end of the feast, as her divine nature allowed. But when she set eyes on Porus in all his opulence, she thought that she might, by joining with him, escape the miserable fate that destiny had cast on her. So she lay down beside him. And thus, a few months later, Eros was born out of the love between Porus and Peña. Love and desire were thus the fruit of wealth and poverty, of abundance and penury. Aphrodite appointed Eros the messenger of love. She inspired passion, and Eros, in the service of the goddess, had the task of forming couples. With a golden arrow to inflame hearts, and a lead arrow to make his victims forever insensitive to love. That morning, Aphrodite commissioned Eros to inspire in Psyche a hopeless, sickening, mad love for one of the ugliest, despicable mortals alive. A monster, she ordered, a hideous creature. Eros obeyed. He left, armed with his bow and arrows. When he discovered Psyche, she was sleeping. Eros stopped dead in his tracks, in awe. Never had he seen a being of such beauty. Psyche was perfection. He now understood Aphrodite's jealousy. In his stricken state, he tripped and fell, wounding himself with one of his arrows, the golden one. So there was Eros, ironically madly enamored with his prey. He returned to Olympus in a state of agitation. He languished, aching with love, attempting to keep his suffering a secret from Aphrodite, lest she become mad with rage. Meanwhile, Psyche was no better off. She was suffering too, but for a different reason. She was becoming more and more tearful as time passed and there was still no one in her life. In despair, her father visited the temple of Apollo at Delphi to consult the oracle. How could he find a husband for his youngest daughter? The oracle of Delphi was the Pythia, a priestess who passed on the will of the gods to mortals. That day, a deity, or was it a certain goddess, uttered this terrifying reply to the Pythia. Psyche must be dressed as if for her wedding, then left on a hilltop where her future husband, a terrible monster, will come to claim her. The king was devastated. Not for an instant could he imagine abandoning his child, let alone giving her up to some fearsome creature. Surely no father could do that. And yet, knowing he could not disobey the will of the gods, he led his daughter in her wedding dress, but accompanied by a funereal cortege, to the top of a hill, and after a final kiss, her tearful parents returned to their palace. So Psyche was abandoned. Suddenly, she felt a breeze. It lifted her from the ground, carried her gently into the air and through the clouds before delicately posing her in a small valley on a carpet of green. Barely had she regained her senses than another surprise awaited her. There, before her eyes, stood a sublime palace in marble and gold, set in a garden full of magnificent trees. The place was deserted, but the doors, studded with gemstones, opened by themselves, accompanied by soft, magical, welcoming voices, inviting her in to visit her new home. Strangely, Psyche felt no fear. She began visiting the palace, going from surprise to surprise, wonder to wonder. That night, still in a state of awe, she reached a sumptuous bedroom, clearly meant for her. She climbed into bed and immediately fell asleep. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, she sensed a presence. Someone was treading in the darkness. It had to be the monster prophesied by the oracle. Seized with panic, Psyche threw off the sheets, ready to flee. Then came a voice which, in a reassuring tone, whispered, "Fear not, I am your husband. All I wish for is your happiness. Trust me, but one thing, never seek to see my face. Otherwise, you will lose me forever." Psyche, astonished yet touched, promised to uphold this strange vow, for the monster, rather than terrify her, had comforted her. The shadow slid into her bed, took her in his arms, and covered her with soft kisses. Overwhelmed, Psyche gave in to love. The next morning, when Psiche awoke, she was alone. And she would be during daylight for every day that followed. But at every nightfall, her husband came to her. She kept her vow to never seek to see his face. And she even surprised herself by enjoying more and more their loving embraces. But time passed, and questions began to torment her. Psiche was suffering from loneliness, and she missed her parents and sisters. For how long could she live like this in this vast palace inhabited by distant voices and an invisible husband? One night, she begged for permission to break her vow, not forever, but for just a few days. But her mysterious husband refused. Psiche persisted with her plea. Finally, her lover yielded, but made her promise that she would give no answer to any questions asked about him. And Psiche gave her promise. A sudden breeze wafted her back to the hilltop where she had been left, just a stone's throw from her family home. On seeing their daughter, whom they believed lost forever, Psyche's parents were overjoyed. A feast was given to mark her return safe and sound. Her sisters were also delighted. But when she began describing her magical palace and the countless gifts offered by her husband, they became green with envy. With one treacherous question after another, the sisters finally have Psiche admit the truth. No, she has never seen her husband's face. They begin to revel in their discovery. He must be frightful because he refuses to show himself. They tell Psiche about a terrifying serpent which can open its jaws like an abyss. They persuade her that one night it will surely devour her. Psiche was so frightened by what she had heard that she became racked with doubt. She wanted to know the truth. On returning to her palace, she awaited, like every night, her husband's visit. As per usual, he slid into the bed beside her. But this time, after their lovemaking, he dozed off. Psiche crept out of bed, lit a candle, and spread light onto her husband's face. And what a surprise! Before her slept the most handsome man anyone had ever set eyes on. But even more astonishing, this so-called monster was none other than the god Eros. Overawed, Psyche's hand began to tremble, and a drop of hot wax fell from the candle onto the sleeper's shoulder. He woke with a start. Their eyes met, and in a flash, furious at having been betrayed, he vanished, just as he had warned her. Psiche sprinted from the room, followed every corridor, searching every room, scouring every corner. Even the welcoming voices had disappeared. The palace was plunged into darkness. At daybreak, the despairing Psiche ran out into the open. She finally reached a river and halted on its banks. She broke down in tears. Not only had she lost a husband, she had lost love, the worst punishment ever. Exhausted, Psiche decided enough was enough and flung herself into the fast-flowing waters. But barely a moment later, the compassionate river lifted her up and placed her gently on the bank. Before her, a strange creature suddenly appeared, half man, half goat. The god Pan, god of shepherd and the pastures. Pan usually liked to scare those who wandered into the woods, but for once, he felt for this young woman wholeheartedly. If she was willing to overcome all obstacles, she would surely end up winning back the heart of Eros. Psiche let herself believe the words of Pan. She continued on her quest, going from temple to temple and praying for the return of her love. But the gods were wary of Aphrodite's wrath. Besides, the goddess was watching, waiting for her revenge. Aphrodite still considered Psiche to be her rival. She loomed before her, finally face to face, the goddess and the mortal. Aphrodite declared to Psiche that from then on she would be her slave, and that she would be spared nothing. The goddess pointed to a rock at the top of a steep mountain. Close by was a spring from which brackish waters flowed down into the Styx, the river of the underworld. Aphrodite gave Psiche a small flask and the task of climbing to the spring, filling it with its water, and bringing it back to her. Psiche agreed. She started climbing the mountain. The summit seemed inaccessible. The rough, slippery rocks were peopled by ferocious dragons. All around her, voices rang out in warning, advising her to give up her quest. But she refused and continued on her way. In her mind were the words of the god Pan, willing her to overcome all obstacles if she wanted to win back the heart of Eros. Just then, an eagle appeared. It was the eagle of Zeus, king of the gods. Also moved by her charge, it snatched her flask and flew off to fill it with the brackish water before returning it to Psiche. Aphrodite was furious. First Pan and now Zeus. She wondered if Eros could be urging the gods of Olympus to protect his lover. But that would be impossible. As punishment for having fallen for Psiche, Aphrodite had had him imprisoned in a double tower within her palace. Aphrodite was even more enraged. She gave her rival a gilded box and ordered her to visit the underworld. Psiche faltered. The underworld, the shades of hell. No mortal had ever been able to go there without being devoured by its terrifying guard, Cerberus, a monstrous three-headed hound. Reigning over the underworld was a redoubtable couple, Hades and his consort Persephone. And it was Persephone that Aphrodite had ordered Psiche to visit. She was supposed to give her the box and to tell her, "Aphrodite begs a little of your beauty." The terrified Psiche was convinced that she would never fulfill her task and decided to free herself from Aphrodite's torments by putting an end to her days. So she climbed to the top of a tower and was ready to fling herself off when suddenly the tower itself addressed her and persuaded her not to give up her life. The tower even told her how to accomplish her mission. To Cerberus, she should offer cakes soaked in drugged wine. To Charon, the ferryman, 2 coins for a return trip across the river Styx. But most importantly, concluded the tower, she must never open the box entrusted to her by Aphrodite, and must refuse any treat Persephone might offer her, because any mortal who tastes the food of the dead will be condemned to live in hell for eternity. Psyche acquiesced and descended into the abyss. As planned, she paid Charon his due and successfully tricked Cerberus. The path was clear. Soon, a vast room opened up before her. Seated on her throne next to Hades was Persephone, who bade her come hither. Psyche duly obliged. She handed her the box and delivered Aphrodite's message. Against all expectations, rather than punish the intruder, the queen of the underworld was flattered. She who had been thought the most beautiful of all goddesses now considered Persephone to be even more beautiful. In a flash, she blew into the box, leaving a part of her beauty, and handed it back to Psyche. On her way back, her task completed, Psyche was overwhelmed with an irresistible desire. What if Persephone's beauty were to enable her to win back the heart of her lost lover? She opened the gilded box and was suddenly overcome with dizziness. She fell into a deep and endless sleep. Psyche was dead. Eros had seen everything and had to react. He escaped from Aphrodite's palace and scaled Mount Olympus to plead with Zeus. He knelt before the king of the gods and beseeched his forgiveness. Yes, he had disobeyed Aphrodite by succumbing to the mortal charms of the goddess's rival. But Psyche, he said, had suffered enough. Eros believed she was highly deserving of immortality, and he would wed her according to divine order. Eros pleaded his case with such dexterity that Zeus was swayed. He forgave Eros and agreed to greet Psyche as an immortal on Olympus. Eros sought out his beloved, gently leaned over her, planted a kiss on her lips, and Psyche awoke. Eros lifted her up and carried her to the home of the gods, where Zeus greeted her as promised. Aphrodite was also present. She realized her combat had been in vain, that it would be impossible to separate the two lovers, and so surrendered in the face of such infinite power. Then, in the presence of all the gathered deities, Psyche was invited to drink ambrosia, the nectar of the gods. Since that day, it's said that a soul which wanders the earth in search of perfect love will only find it in the afterlife, just as Psyche could only reunite with Eros after her death on Olympus, where she now sits amongst the gods.